McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbites. Ben Kinsley is joining me today as co-host and co-producer. Welcome.
Thanks, Pat.
And we have a repeat guest, Guy Page, who is the founder of Page Communications. Yeah. Welcome.
Hi, Pat.
Nice to see you again.
Thanks for being on.
The reason we asked Guy to come on is he has State House Headliners, it's called. Is that totally email or?
No, actually, it's been carried in a newspaper and on a news blog site now, too.
Oh, excellent, great. Yeah. Well, this headliner that he produces has got every topic that was covered last year in the legislature, and I saw the last one. I thought, what a great thing to sort of begin the new season, coming up soon. What is it, January 6th?
3rd.
Oh, 3rd. They're coming back soon, that we could maybe set a little platform for what was discussed last year and maybe repeat it again this year. So let me tell you a little bit about Guy, because he's got quite a few things here, and I'm going to read it, so sorry about that. Guy Page, Page Communications, is affiliated with the Vermont Energy Partnership, the Vermont Alliance for Ethical Healthcare, Physicians, Families, and Friends for a Better Vermont, and Guy Page is a member of the coordinating committee for the Consumer Liaison Group of ISO New England. We know all about ISO from Meredith Angwin.
Oh,
she's
sure.
always on our show. We love her. And the operators of the Regional Transmission Grid. Goodness, you're a busy guy.
I try.
You try. Is there anything in your background that you wanted to, that led up to all of this, that you wanted to talk about?
Well, you know, I was a newspaper reporter, editor, publisher for a long time, and sold my newspaper in Colchester in 2002, and just decided, you know, I've been writing about the news for so long, I think I'll get involved in the advocacy government affairs world.
Right.
And here I am.
And you try to be nonpartisan on your coverage. It's just the facts.
I try to not even mention parties, if at all possible.
Oh, I've never actually noticed that. I'll have to go back and notice that. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
We don't do that here either. Just every once in a while I go off the reservation, but I try not to. Oh, and it says you've been on DEV, and you have a medium.com blogger. You have that. So that's great. And it's the way Guy writes is very interesting, because I can understand it. It's written for everybody to understand, and yet it's very complex. So it's good to read it. You'll really get informed. So we're going to just throw topics out to you and let you talk.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Why don't you start off? And
well, one you've covered quite a bit in the State House Headliners is marijuana. You know, the legislature couldn't really come to a conclusion on it last year, you know, and so the governor's put together this commission. Looks like he's ready to sign something this year.
If.
Yeah, so there's a couple if, ands, and buts in there, but so where is the current state of marijuana legalization? Where's that at now? And what do you see happening over the next few months during the legislative session?
So there's two tracks. The first track is personal cultivation and consumption. You can growing it in your own house, growing it legally. That's the first track. And a lot of people think the legislature is going to take a really good look at that, maybe even in the first month in January. And the governor has an advisory commission that's been asking a lot of questions about that, and it will have a report on January 15th. There are some people who think that it's like a done deal for that. I don't really see that, because the governor has been saying all along, very consistently, I will sign this legislation if you can satisfy me on, most of all, highway safety. Is there a good driver's impairment test for marijuana? Question number one. Question number two, what's legalization likely to do for highway safety based on what's happened in other states? Well, was it? But a month ago, the Vermont's top law enforcement officer, Tom Anderson, said, if we legalize, we will see more highway fatalities in Vermont. Said, I would swear to that in court, that that is going to happen. So that would seem to me to raise a real red flag on the whole question of highway safety. And the other thing is, how do you test for this stuff? Because you can't, the saliva tests are no good. The breathalyzer, it isn't a breathalyzer test. what they have are what they call these drug recognition experts who put a suspect through like an hour-long interview, read their vital signs, look in their eyes, watch them walk, just a fairly long, thorough process. And what I've learned is that is admissible in a Vermont court, but only the judge who made the ruling in this said only if it's done by a trained officer and a thorough evaluation is conducted. So it relies on the suspect cooperating for an hour or so, or however long it takes, shorter or longer, for it to finish that evaluation, to do a really substantial evaluation. So, and there's some other sort of, apparently there's never been a conviction on DRE testimony in a jury trial in the state of Vermont. They haven't ever had a conviction on this. They've done it on some plea agreements, but when someone comes and says, no, I'm innocent, and the DRE officer says, well, I found that you were impaired, and the judge goes, I'll accept that testimony, or the jury buys it. It's happened in other states. It hasn't happened in Vermont yet. So you sort of got to wonder how ready is our court system and our police system to handle the marijuana impairment issue. To me, it looks
well, because you also want to be fair to the driver too. I mean, if you're going to pull him out of a car and have him stand on the side of the road for an hour, you know, in February when it's 5 degrees out.
Well, apparently they bring him inside.
Yeah, they
must
put
whatever.
him somewhere.
You know, and there is a blood test too, isn't there, that measures the level of THC in the bloodstream.
Right. Which, if you're in an accident or something, and then I suppose at the hospital they'll take that. But if you haven't had that, you would have to willingly submit to a blood test, which not too many people are going to be doing.
Right. But if there is, say, like a finding from a roadside test, like where the officer has probable cause, they smell marijuana or whatever, because they can search a vehicle based on the smell of marijuana. Right?
That's right.
So if they're able to search a vehicle, would they, you know, maybe there's a way for them to say, hey, I smell marijuana in the car, I want to bring you back to the station, we're going to test your blood. And you may not get the
You don't have to submit to the blood test.
You don't, it's still optional.
That's right.
So
because you don't even have to, with alcohol, you don't have to submit to the breathalyzer.
I learned
either.
that today. There was
Yeah,
a
you
court
don't have
decision
to.
in Minnesota. Basically, you
You
don't
can say
have to.
no.
you can say no?
Yeah.
Interesting.
That
Don't
was
say
news to
no.
me.
You
Don't-
can say no. I'm just saying. don't
Yes,
let that
as
go
we head
there.
up into
Forget
New Year's
that.
Eve,
Yeah, right,
that was
exactly.
great.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah,
can say no.
take notes.
Yes, exactly.
So I want to stay on this topic
Sure.
for another minute. What states have legalized so far? I know, District of Columbia has legalized.
Right.
Obviously, Colorado has legalized. Washington State, California is in the next couple of months, I believe.
Right. Alaska, I think.
Alaska, Maine, Massachusetts is getting pretty close.
Right.
What other states have done it, and what are their models? Because they all look different.
The models are very different. I think you've listed most of the states that have moved beyond medical marijuana to more of either personal use or a cultivation. Wow, everything I'm hearing out of Colorado is you have a huge rise in homeless, actually a lot more arrests, a lot more black market pot being grown. You wouldn't think that was the case, but that is what's happening. They're having to appropriate $1 or $2 million in the budget this year to deal with some illicit growing in northern Colorado. I would say that it's not really working out all that well in Colorado.
Does the topic of child safety come up in any of these discussions? Because for me, the example that you're setting for your child and the safety, if they were to get their hands on any of this,
And
particularly
so many,
the edibles.
That's right. If you have the idea of, okay, personal consumption, you're just growing your own, well, what that really means is that there are going to be a lot more homes in your neighborhood where someone's growing and has edibles in their fridge. Right. Well, kids will raid a fridge and they'll eat a brownie.
Right.
And really, are more liable for really toxic levels of marijuana, because the marijuana now, the marijuana that I'm sure none of us smoked when we were younger, was like 2 or 3% THC.
Right.
Now it's minimum 15. Some of the stuff's like 50, 80%. So it's much more really mental illness producing than it used to be.
Yeah, it is not your mother's marijuana.
Right.
That's the.
That's the one fact I think in this whole debate that really shocked me, was the change in, because it's like everything else, they've genetically modified it to be more
genetically modified, Ben?
Yeah.
We can't have that in Vermont.
Yes, well, they're a little hypocritical about a few things.
Well, but I think it's interesting that it's we have modified. I say we as the human race has modified this plant that has really, there's a lot of potential benefits to, in terms of like the chemicals that are in it, aside from THC, because the THC is the one that produces the high.
That's right.
But there's other stuff in there that's really, really good, potentially. But we have accentuated the one chemical that gives you the high and made the plants produce more of it.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Right.
What I would assume in my head, I'm thinking there's got to be more state employees to license like if I'm going to decide to grow it at home, there's got to be a licensure. We have to be able to say that the police can come in and verify whether I'm really growing 4 plants and 2 baby, whatever the limit is. It was a 10 by 10 plot, I think, at the last bill.
Right.
So you're going to, and who knows, for people coming to your house who are not law enforcement who want to take your plants.
Sure.
I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that nobody's thinking about. Oh, I'm going to grow it at my house, but they're going to know it and they're going to check.
Well, so this begs another question: is what kind of plants are you going to be allowed to grow at your house? Are you going to be able to grow the 50% THC plants, or are you going to grow the 10 or 12% THC plants, or maybe
that's not even in any bill I saw.
And so that's kind of some of the questions I think that remain to be answered. And I think also, Vermont's the model that Vermont is moving towards at the moment, the home grow model, is more like the DC model than the Colorado model. What have the effects on DC been that people, have they seen an increase in?
Boy, there's been one really tragic thing. Tragic's maybe a strong word, but one of the really compelling things in the House Judiciary Committee this year for personal use was that it's racist, because to arrest people for marijuana possession, because disproportionately in a lot of jurisdictions, so many of them are of an ethnic background. And what's happening in DC is that there are 3 or 4 times the number of marijuana-related arrests in this, legal thing. It's for public intoxication, and a great number of them are African American. So the situation that a lot of people wanted to avoid is actually, in reality, in DC, is becoming more of a problem.
Well, it's interesting because I think people think of it as like tobacco products, right? Potentially where you can smoke as long as you're in a designated smoking area. You can smoke it in public, but really the way that most of the regulations are written is more like alcohol, where you can consume it, but it has to be in a certain setting. You can't just walk down the street with a.
I think that's right.
And so it's and it's an interesting thing because you're almost implicitly giving permission for people to engage in inappropriate behavior, even if it's even if it's legal in certain settings. Like alcohol, for example, you still should not drink and drive, but
right.
So one of the other questions I had is if you can test for THC in the bloodstream, why would you not continue what we basically have now, and any level of THC results in a DUI? Why would you not continue that system if you can't accurately measure how it's impairing them? Because
you can't require a blood test.
But if you can't require a breathalyzer test like you do with alcohol now, how is that any different?
the thing with the drug recognition experts is it's all based on observation. And there's nothing stopping the policeman from observing. But you can't compel the suspect to allow you to take his pulse, to take your temperature, to do a blood test, to give a saliva test. You just can't compel that.
Do you know how many police officers in Vermont have body cameras right now?
Don't know. I do know there are 53 trained DREs right now.
Okay.
And they did about 250 evaluations last year. But that's a really good question, the body cameras. I don't know, Ben.
Because I would imagine if you have these DREs that are out in the field that are field testing people, there's probably body cam footage of that. And does that body cam footage support what those drug recognition experts are doing in the field, or could it undermine them in their evaluation? Because you don't always get a full picture from a body camera. They don't always pick up words that are spoken or things that are out of view.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, because it's almost a he said, she said thing sometimes. You need, like with the breathalyzer, there's a number,
Right.
which is all recognized. With this, it's the officer's view, a reaction to how you're responding to him.
Yeah.
So that could be he said, she said. So that's harder
like
to prove than alcohol.
It's kind of like the cop with the scanner going, oh, okay, so this guy's going 3 miles over the speed limit, and so technically he's speeding, and I'm going to nail him for it today because I'm in a bad mood.
Not in a good mood.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, I don't know, this homegrown stuff does not have the same carbon imprint, does it, than what you were talking about before about how much carbon footprint, which is a great discussion.
If you grow it outside, there's really no real carbon. But in Vermont, most people don't grow it outside. They're going to be growing it inside.
Right.
If you grow enough, if you grow like 2 plants, which is what the personal consumption law says, you will be using enough electricity to double your power bill.
And we're talking power from like
electricity.
from the lights that are
mostly the lights, but also there's fans, air conditioners, a couple other things, but the lights are the big one.
And because obviously, Vermont's probably not a great growing environment for just about anything, but what's the natural growing environment for marijuana? Like, what's their natural habitat look like?
I don't know.
What do you mean, like outside? Which is
but I mean, the most plants have a very specific growing temperature, average growing temperature. They have a soil, a certain type of soil composition that they like, a certain amount of humidity, and and that's why most plants are not suited for Vermont, except for pine trees. They grow great here, but otherwise.
There is an outdoor marijuana growing company called Verdant Vermont that says, hey, we can grow it outside. I do know. What I've been reading is that marijuana is a very finicky plant. It's not like raspberries. Put it in the ground and it's going to grow.
Right.
It's pretty good chance that if you don't do it just right.
Wow. There's an investment gone down the hill. Right. We should move along because it's. We could talk about this for the entire hour.
Yeah.
But you covered climate change a lot, and we've had several shows about climate change and how it fits in with the carbon tax and the bill. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what's happening in that area.
There's what you might call a carbon caucus in the Vermont legislature, which is a group of legislators who are very focused on carbon taxation. And first of all, I have some problems with that whole idea. One of them is a lot of these legislators are also people who are pushing marijuana legalization, which will, if they do like Colorado scale cultivation, that will take about 1/3 of the power that we have been saving through Efficiency Vermont, all of our conservation efforts, how hard we work at that, how much money we spend on that, 1/3 of it
gone
right out the door.
Wow.
So it's sort of like, okay, why are we doing this? And how important really is it to save energy? And then the whole, the closure of Vermont Yankee, which was a huge carbon-free generator. So there's sort of like 2 strikes against the carbon tax people. We want you to pay more for carbon, but we're going to get rid of carbon-free generators we don't like. But we're going to grow marijuana, even though it's going to greatly increase the state's carbon footprint. So, but they want us to take it seriously. And I'm sort of asking them, are you taking it seriously?
Yeah, right.
And if you're not, why should we?
How dedicated are they to
Yeah.
the climate change? You have to pick one or the other.
Yeah.
You can't
and
go back and forth.
as Peter Schemmel used to say, sometimes you have to make the hard choices. And that, to me, would be a hard choice that they maybe should be making.
What do they, we've had, oh my gosh, what is his name from the fuel dealers?
Matt
Cota?
Matt Cota. He is so wonderful
Yeah.
and obviously passionate about this issue. He also came to speak before a group I was having breakfast with a couple of weeks ago. And what do they, are they meeting our goal? What is it, 90%? I mean, why are they doing this? It sounds very naive to ask it, but why?
I believe they're actually ahead of their the energy goal. Is that correct?
They are ahead of some of the energy, electricity generation goals, but the real goal is reducing emissions. There's a law that says we will reduce our emissions by thus and such over the next 15 or 20
Right.
years. A little reported fact, except in State House headliners, was that the deputy director of the of A&R testified before an energy committee a couple months ago and said, we have no idea how our emissions reduction is going. We have a number as of 2013, but since 2013, the metrics have all changed. No one can really agree on how to measure these things. Apparently, the Trump administration is not being terribly helpful with sort of a central clearinghouse of information. And he said, not only do we not have any idea where we're at, state of California, that has a multi-million-dollar budget for this, they don't have any idea. So in terms of actual emissions reductions, targeted reductions,
So is
No
there
knows.
some kind of idea on their part that if they make it so costly for us to have our SUVs and our trucks, that then we'll
Yes.
give them up and buy the
that is the plan.
smaller cars I can't fit into?
That is the that is
Well,
the explicit
that's the
plan.
plan.
I think there's
Yes.
another step in here even. You know, we focused for so long on energy generation. You know,
Right.
like for such a long time,
This is true.
we had focused 80% of our efforts at 40% of the problem. Actually, it's less than 40% of the problem.
Yeah.
But and now, like
10%.
we're looking at a situation where pretty much all of our carbon emissions are coming from home heating and from transportation.
Right.
So, you know, to go after those two, home heating is a big chunk of it. Transportation is still the lion's share, but
Yeah.
but
They both are, you're right.
But home heating and home heating is a difficult one because you can move away from carbon emitting home heating solutions, but that increases demand for energy.
For electricity.
For electricity, even
Right.
with high efficiency heat pumps, you're still increasing the demand for electricity.
And batteries.
And backup batteries and stuff like that. So it's an interesting conundrum that we kind of find ourselves in. And further, you know, the transportation one's really difficult in a rural state like Vermont. How do you reduce carbon emissions other than incentivizing the use of, either you do it one of two ways. Either you incentivize the use of high efficiency vehicles and you do it through either a positive mechanism of, you know, offering incentives like Green Mountain Power. They're offering, I think, a $10,000 incentive to buy the Nissan Leaf,
Right.
the electric vehicle. And I know several people who have done that. But and then there's also a negative incentive, which is make gasoline more expensive to force people to buy higher efficiency cars.
Which do you think, Ben, people are going to want to do?
Well, I can speak for me personally. I prefer the positive incentive as
Right.
opposed to the negative incentive.
Right.
Because look at how high the gas prices have gone up in years past, and we're still buying
Well,
Right.
SUVs.
so here's the other
Trucks.
piece, right?
Right.
You know, and you have Nissan Leaf is a relatively good vehicle overall. The Tesla 3 is coming out. It's released already, but there's a huge backlog in orders for it. It's a reasonable price point. It's a $35,000 vehicle. It's the
Right.
same price point as you go out and pick any a Honda Accord, a Ford Fusion, any of those, a Toyota Camry. It's price comparable with any of those vehicles,
Yeah.
relatively speaking.
Right.
And actually, if you add the incentives on top of it, it's a little bit cheaper even.
Yeah.
So those vehicles are out there. There's just not enough of them yet, right? To make them accessible to the market. And if you have people that are driving from Bristol to Burlington, you know, on a daily basis, that's their commute. Do you really want to increase their gas prices, make their commute more expensive, or give them a positive incentive where, oh, we can actually reduce the cost of your commute and give you a lower carbon vehicle?
That's right.
By utilizing things like hybrid technology and electric vehicles.
And to me, this is all about the market is actually responding to the need.
Yeah.
You have the Nissan saying we are going to offer this $10,000 rebate, and that wasn't your rates. That was Nissan doing it, and they became little Vermont dealership became the second largest Nissan Leaf selling dealership in the country after San Francisco, a mega one out in San Francisco, because of these rebates.
Yeah.
Cool.
They were literally calling up different dealers and saying, hey, can you get me a few more Leafs? We've got a market for it here.
I know at least 3 people that have bought them in the last 6 months.
So I think of it like the, Pat, you probably remember the great landline legislation that banned all landlines in 1998 because they were bad for us.
Oh, yes.
And that forced us to use cell phones.
That's right. Now look, cell phones.
Now they're saying cell phones
There's
are
a
bad.
little gray cells.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, there was no ban.
Right.
It just happened
Right.
because that's what people
right.
wanted.
That's right.
And it made more sense.
Right.
And we're seeing that
I
with
remember that.
we're seeing that with transportation. We're seeing that with instead of old oil burners, natural gas is cheaper. The systems burn cleaner.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost 50% cleaner than propane even. Yeah.
So the market is making energy emissions cheaper and
Well,
cleaner.
that's what Matt was saying. You know, you can, if you have the more technology and better equipment, people will buy it. And because I think besides wanting trucks, we're also very frugal in this state. And so if there's a better way and safer way, they'll
So
do
you
it.
can
Well,
coerce or you can.
Well, so here's the problem
Incentivize.
as I see it at the moment is the adoption rate is there, right? People are getting these technologies. You know, they're probably not going to every vehicle they own is going to be electric. It's probably going to be they have an electric vehicle and they have, you know, most of the families that I know that have electric vehicles have an electric vehicle and then maybe a hybrid or a gas-powered vehicle also. But the real problem is that, you know, they can't get access to them fast enough. There's just not enough. There's not enough of them on the market. I mean, the Leaf is the early one out, but the Tesla 3 you can't get your hands on it right now. And then, you know, Chevy and Ford both announced in the last 3 months that they're going to have pretty much everything in their lineup is going to be electric within the next 10 years.
Well,
so the adoption, it's going to flip really quick as soon as people start getting access to these types of vehicles.
Just in talking about the carbon bill, I've read about the Essex plan.
oh, right.
And I have, tell you the truth, I have no idea what that is or isn't. What is the Essex plan?
It's an acronym. I forget what it means. You know, extra special, super excellent. I don't know. But the idea is that it taxes the heck out of all fossil fuels, especially driving and home heat, and rebates the money, to some of that money, to reduce electricity rates. And, oh, by the way, also provides a lot of nice little incentives for renewable power.
Because this has some support in with some of our legislators, because they've been, I've heard, you know, Representative so-and-so supports the Essex plan. And
it has, I think it has support among the Carbon Caucus.
Right.
But most of the legislators are going, I talked to a usually somewhat sort of liberal, you might say, legislator from near the Northeast Kingdom who works with older people. And he said, you know, no way am I supporting that. I see how these people are struggling to stay warm and get their cars down the road. I'm not going to make that harder for them.
Right.
Yeah, well, in the transportation piece of it, I mean, it's a difficult. It's basically a carbon tax with a different name on it.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a recapture mechanism. And the thing is, like, even if you put some mechanism in place that reroutes those dollars to low-income people, it's still, you can't get it back to the people you're taking it from, because the people that are in rural communities that are commuting further, you know, the people that have the longest commutes, they're the people that are going to be affected the most by this. You know, there's just no way around it.
Yeah.
So we should move on with our list here. There was a comment that you, in an article you wrote, it said, say no to mandates, yes to Vermont clean energy empowerment. Could you describe what that Vermont clean energy empowerment
I think it's letting the market work
the market, right.
in favor of clean energy.
Right.
And where the state can give nudges and incentives. I mean, I happen to believe that climate change, human climate change is real, and we do have some moral responsibility to do something about it. But things like, you know, charging stations.
Right.
Why not? Use the VW bus settlement to do clean bus transportation, which I believe is the main thing that they're going to use that money for. There's a lot of things you can do, even like bike sharing
Right.
You go to any big city and you can ride a bike
They tried that
from
in
hither and yon.
Montpelier one year. I don't know if they're
It
still
was a
doing
pretty
it.
low, I remember that. It was a pretty low-tech operation.
Well,
But
they
you
had
know,
all
in
these bicycles
Burlington,
around. You could just take it.
you know, some enterprising UVM kid gets a grant and it opens up a B Corp. And in fact, you probably know Andrew Savage.
Oh, sure.
He is now the money man for a huge multi-million-dollar bike sharing company.
Huh.
And I don't know why a bunch of his buddies from the state of Vermont give him a call and say, you know, sure could use that in Burlington. How about it?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And where is he now? Where did you?
Some huge company that is on the cutting edge with a gigantic seed capital.
Should bring it home.
Right. That's what I think.
Excellent.
Well, this is a huge industry in China.
Oh, wow, I bet. Yeah.
You know, the ride sharing thing. Actually, they just announced this week that the Uber equivalent in China just got a $4 billion seed money to expand.
Wow.
Oh,
So they're going to rival the size of Uber in the next couple of
Because
years.
they don't need too many more cars on their roads.
No,
From the pictures I've seen, anyway.
They're trying to do everything they can to get cars off
Yeah,
the road.
right,
Uber is,
right.
and you know, ride sharing is one of those, and bike sharing is another
Yeah.
one. They're super popular.
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Des, you wanted to give us an update, or I was going to ask you for the judicial ruling about assisted suicide, which
Sure.
is very interesting for me. There was an article about how many people have taken advantage of
Right.
the assisted suicide law. I was a little,
Something like 3 dozen.
yeah, I was a little surprised.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are they up to?
Well, the group that I work with, Vermont Alliance for Ethical Healthcare, we're mostly doctors. I'm not, but they are. And they don't want to have to be told by the state of Vermont, you must prescribe these lethal pills for your
Right,
patients.
right.
Because for them, it's just murder.
Right.
you know,
Do
to
no
that.
harm.
Right, yeah, that little thing,
Yeah.
do no harm. And the supporters of assisted suicide, who of course were all about, hey, this is about choice and you do your own thing, now we're saying, no, we need to compel the doctors to do that. You need to do this because,
Or what?
or you're not in compliance with the law or something. So the Alliance actually took the state to court, and we secured an agreement that said that doctors of conscience don't need to prescribe, they can simply refer to another doctor.
Yeah, right.
And that was, even that really very common sense free choice thing was contested by the supporters of assisted suicide. They went back to court, and the judge a couple of days ago said, I meant what I said, really, the doctors,
away.
yes.
Yeah. And
So-
where does this stand now? Is it going to come back again until they get what they want?
Well, that's a good question. It was in federal court, and federal court has a way of just saying,
No.
thou shalt, and
Right.
don't bother me
Right.
anymore.
Because I don't know what, I mean, if you say to a doctor, thou shalt not, you have to answer the question, or what? And it's
Right.
got to be something that the doctors will not want to have happen.
I would imagine some doctors would be say, well, I'm going to a state where
Right, I'm
I'm
out
not
of here.
being compelled to kill my patients.
Yep, right.
Yeah, it's kind of a scary thing
Yeah.
Yeah.
to think about if you could be forced to end someone's life against your own.
That's
Yeah.
the whole coercive part
Right.
of this legislation, this law that bothers me.
This is mixing and matching, but I just had a ruling about the baker that didn't want to bake a cake for the wedding of a, and that's sort of the same, not comparing the suicide with the gay population, but it's the same sort of approach. I have my religious, ethical beliefs, and I don't want to.
Right.
So I would think they would use that as some kind of comparison.
Well, I think this is even, in this situation, we're talking about a life and death issue, and so there's a whole lot of morality concerns that come into play about what a doctor feels like his role is as a doctor. Is it to
Hippocratic oath deal.
Right. So I'm with you on this one. I don't think we should be forcing doctors to do this. If they want to, and then they feel like that's the right thing to do because it's relieving pain and suffering, by all means. But I think the point where you cross that threshold into forcing them to do it is a dangerous one.
And as long as they will give names of let them go to the other, the doctor next door.
Right. They can refer them to a doctor that does.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So go ahead, maybe ask because we know about this. The solar jobs.
Solar jobs. Yeah. Well, this is one that we've debated for a long time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I did the math on that. They say, and they rightly say, the federal government says there are 19,000 green jobs, quote unquote, green jobs in Vermont. So that number is broken out. And what that means is, what the real meaning is, half of those are energy conservation type jobs.
HVAC.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Right.
But those are reclassified. They're not new jobs.
And yes, and when you sugar it all down, for the solar industry being a subset of the renewable power industry, there are, what's the number I had there? 1,000.
1,680.
Right, which is still a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
And those are, and that's full-time equivalent. So there's probably more actual jobs, but if you sort of blend that into a full-time equivalent, the solar industry in Vermont, about 1,600 jobs.
Which isn't too shabby.
That isn't too shabby.
It's
That's
not 19,000,
Yeah.
but I think that's the number Annette Smith was using when she came on.
Well, yeah, we had talked
was
about
much
that
lower.
a few weeks ago with Annette
Yeah.
Smith and Mark Whitworth.
Yeah.
And it's, a lot of those, when you look at that 19,000 clean energy jobs, like, you take half of them right off the top because they're all reclassified HVAC installers.
That's not being very transparent if they're reclassifying jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, there's things that would have been in, service and industry and before, and they're just moving them over into the clean energy category because suddenly now your HVAC guy is installing your heat pumps, So, that's now a clean energy job because he was working on air conditioners before, now he's working on, doing heat pumps once a week,
And you also have to look at, those jobs were created with a pricing system for solar power that says we will set the cost of solar power about 4 times the market rate, and if you can build those panels, the utility has to buy it.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So that's what net metering is.
Yeah.
And the reason our Green Mountain Power's rates just went up 5%, part of that is, and that's an $80 million take out of the Vermont economy, 5% rate increase.
Can you say that number again?
$80 million
$80 million.
take.
And this is on top of the 9% increase in Blue Cross Blue Shield premiums.
Right.
You got a 7% increase in property taxes.
Yeah.
Well, we're headed in the same direction again.
I might be moving out of Vermont next year.
So renewable power is a chunk of that rate increase, net metering.
Yeah.
And we're paying
for those of us who net metering. Can you put that in some kind of a 6th grade?
Sure.
Because this is over my pay grade.
Okay, I have no idea exactly why they call it net metering, but it refers to the practice of putting some solar panels up on your house or in your side yard or maybe in a bunch of people building one in a field somewhere. And according to, enabled by state law, you can then sell that power to the utilities.
Right.
You become a generator.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have a preferential pricing structure of about 18 cents a kilowatt hour Whereas right now, the wholesale rate is about, well, 4 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's 2 cents, sometimes it's 6 cents, but call it 4 or 5 cents. And not only do you get the preferential pricing, but you have a guaranteed customer in that utility, because the state law has told the utilities,
You must buy.
they built those panels, they're connected to the grid, you must buy it.
Now there's a cap on how big those can be. The net metered.
Yes.
Like I think the community solar.
Right.
There's several community solar projects out
Right.
there that are net metered, but there's a cap. Is it like 500 megawatts or 50 megawatts? Or
I want to say 5 megawatts capacity is what it is for solar, I think, right now. And that's a fairly good-sized generator. That's a lot of panels.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really hurtful for the baby utilities, Enosburg Water and Light, those people, who suddenly have a huge solar system being built within their village limits, and their small rate base has suddenly got to pay out 18 cents a kilowatt hour.
Whoa.
And it's really harmful for them.
Right.
They're complaining about it.
Yeah, because there's a lot of pro and con about, do we need it, don't we need it, back and forth, right?
Yes.
Will there be something this legislative session, you think, on it? Has it gotten to that level?
Don't know.
Well, the whole theory behind net metering is essentially that you can, instead of having to have a battery pack where you can store the energy, you basically store it by pushing it back out into the grid, and then the grid repays you when the panels aren't working. Essentially, is kind of the idea. So you have instead of storing the energy on site, you're storing it, quote unquote, by pushing it back out into the grid and letting it absorb into the grid, and then when the sun's not shining, you're pulling the energy back from the grid. So
I suppose.
The theory of net metering is essentially you turn their meter backwards, because you're producing energy on the household side more than you're using, pushing that back into the grid, and then you're at night when the panels aren't working.
Guy, we wanted to talk about Vermont Yankee and what's happening down there, because I know you're following that really closely.
There's a real opportunity to do something great for the Windham County economy and environmentally as well.
Which they need.
Oh boy, do they ever. It's one of the most challenged areas in the state.
Yeah.
And when Vermont Yankee closed, the real concern was that that plant is going to sit empty and nothing's going to happen there for about 60 years until this trust fund gets enough money so they can actually decommission the plant and restore the site. And maybe our great-grandchildren might be able to get a job on the new businesses there.
Right.
But otherwise, just going to sit there and do nothing. So along comes this plant, this company called North Star that's very good and cutting edge at taking apart power plants. And they said, look, we've got a plan. We can do this thing in 10 years, starting immediately, and you'll be able to go on and build a data center or another power plant or whatever. You'll be able to use that site. So obviously a great economic shot in the arm. And also it would mean that all the land is what's called restored to a green field, which is, it'll be nothing but a grassy field.
Nice.
There. It'll be restored to the way it originally
And
was.
they have the technology to decontaminate?
Yes, these
10
guys
years
are
versus
very
60?
Yes, they do. They're very good at it. They're also contracting with partners who are like the world's best people at taking apart nuclear reactors safely.
Wow.
Arriva out of France, and they use like these underwater power saws. It's an incredible video. Anyway, so the Vermont Public Utilities Commission needs to say yes or no on this. And they're having their last public hearing on this on January 4th, 7 o'clock, Brattleboro High School. And I'm going to be there, and I'm hoping anyone else who can just see that this would be such a shot in the arm to the Vermont economy in so many ways.
Because they lost so much good salaries and just business, the ripple effect business from a large plant like that in the community.
So why is it that the current owner, which is Vermont Yankee or Yankee Power, why is it that they would take 60 years to disassemble a plant as opposed to North Star only taking 10?
Well, as the owners of the plant will tell you, we're not in the nuclear power plant decommissioning business. We're in the business of operating plants. Right. And they don't have, avant-garde, cutting-edge business plans built around decommissioning power plants. So what they're planning to do is to put it into what's called SAF store, which is a federal term which says we'll do nothing here, almost nothing here, until that decommissioning trust fund reaches a certain dollar level, at which point the Nuclear Regulatory Commission will say, yes, you now have enough money to go ahead and do this. That's one way that nuclear power plant decommissioning is done, and it's what Entergy decided to do.
So
but
who pays for North Star, Entergy or the state? Or who pays for, somebody's paying North Star to do this?
Oh, North Star would be buying the plant,
okay,
but along with the plant goes the decommissioning trust fund.
So they would buy from
Entergy,
not
buy
the
Vermont
state.
Yankee from Entergy, that's right.
So there's no money in it that we would have to...
no.
Oh.
What's
the
current
holdup?
What's the current balance of the Vermont decommissioning trust fund?
It's about $600 million.
600 million.
It's growing like crazy, like everything else in the stock market.
Start buying Bitcoin.
Yeah. I don't know.
Who's resistant to do this?
Well, there are people, and I do understand this part, that people will say, look, this sounds really good. We want to make sure that they have the fiscal wherewithal and the planning wherewithal. We want to make sure it's a good plan. I get that. And that's why the Public Utilities Commission has been studying this for over a year and probably has another half year to go. And at the same time, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has their own licensing permitting thing going on.
Right.
And
so
the NRC is a federal agency.
That's right.
Yeah, as opposed to the state.
That's right.
Then both of them have to review it.
Both of them have to review it and approve it. Yeah.
Does North Star have any facilities that they can point to and say, we've done this, it's done, check it out? Is there any comparable?
Yes and no. And this is one of the criticisms that people raise is they haven't done a comparable nuclear power plant themselves. What their partners, Areva, have done tons of these. They have worked in a subcontracting capacity on big nuclear power plants. They've done the whole job on small nuclear plants. And as the owner, the CEO, Scott State, has often said, look, we take apart humongous coal and natural gas plants that are, 5 times the size of Vermont Yankee and very complex. And we do this all the time. And we're always on time and under budget. They're like, they are the nation's leader, and they're the best at doing this.
And so their profit is taking over the plant and getting the land usable and turning around and either selling it or using it for themselves, for stores or businesses.
Right.
That's where they make the money eventually in 10 years.
So what's their, so the trust fund is currently around $600 million. What is the estimated decommissioning cost that North Star has put out? Do they have an estimated cost for what it's going to?
They do. It's a lot less than Vermont Yankees because their plan is more streamlined and smarter. Yankee had like Entergy had a $1.2 billion price tag, and
so twice what the current decommissioning fund is.
Pretty much. And North Star is saying, a lot of that work has already been done in that $1.2 million. In the last 2 years, a lot of good work has been done. And also, our way of doing things, for various reasons, is just a lot more streamlined and affordable. And we'll get the job done just as well or better. Because this is what we do.
So there's no dollar amount that North Star has put out there?
I think there is. I can't recall it at the moment, but I know it's a lot less than the 1.2 billion number.
Gotcha.
Right. So we have 7 minutes left, and I wanted to talk about the Democrats came out, Speaker of the House and the Senate Pro Tem came out and talked about their priorities. Right. And I'm going to list them, and we'll see how much time we can have, because I'm particularly interested in one of them. But paid family leave, hourly rate to $15, clean water, and I thought they had, mental health, which was interesting. And then I think somewhere along the line they were talking about Act 46, but I'm not sure. So if you want to pick one or two of those.
Sure, I'll tackle the clean water one first. The state has a humongous bill federally imposed to an obligation to clean up Lake Champlain. So I'm at a press conference in Barrie 2-3 months ago, and some reporter says, "You're going to raise taxes to clean up the lake?" Ask the governor. The governor says, "Whoa, my first choice for getting to clean up the lake is the approval of the New England Clean Link Power Plan, which is a power cable running 1,000 megawatts from Hydro-Quebec down to Massachusetts, clean, renewable hydropower, and Vermont would get from this $200 million in lake cleanup money."
Really?
Yeah, if this thing is approved. There's 4 or 5 plans that are sort of in the works right now. One of them is going to be the winner.
How long has this been a subject of discussion?
A couple years.
Really?
Yeah.
Where have I been?
And the decision's being made pretty soon, isn't it? As we're
In
talking.
April. There's an initial decision in January and a final one in April.
Gotcha. So basically within the next month, we're going to know what way they're leaning.
We may have a
That's
good idea
great.
of what way they're leaning.
And the opponents, what's their opponents to this?
You know,
Environmental?
it's more, oddly enough, this thing just sort of went right on through. And a lot of people think, oh, I'm so cynical, Pat, I'm sorry. But a lot of people think that $200 million promise of lake cleanup money, perhaps that's something to do with how quickly it went through. Okay?
Seriously?
But having said that, is everything I understand about it, it's a good project.
It's just, on the surface, it sounds really,
there really wasn't
like,
an
why
awful
not?
lot to complain about.
No, right.
So, and who's making the decision on this?
This is the, I don't know if it's the regulators in Massachusetts or if it's the National Grid, which is the Green Mountain Power of Massachusetts.
Gotcha. So it's Massachusetts, it's southern New England, and they're looking for
They
a
need
new
us
power
as
source.
The Northern
throughway.
Pass in New Hampshire is one of those things. There's another power line called the Granite Link that's going to be running through the Northeast Kingdom if it gets approved. That is that's on the table. There's a Maine project, and I think there's another New Hampshire project. There's like 5 different
So
potential lines.
we pay for we get the benefit of these lines, but Massachusetts pays for it? Or do we have some kind of financial obligation?
That's about it. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Because
Let me see
they're
what my
paying a
answer would
toll. They're paying a toll.
Wow.
And there's other money that the state would be getting too.
Is Vermont the most direct linked for them? Because I mean, Hydro-Quebec is just north of us. But
Well, the Northern Pass people in New Hampshire would say, oh no, to bring it right through New Hampshire. But the Northern Pass has run into a lot of trouble.
well, it's going through the national parks, which is
Right.
part where a lot of the problem
Right.
is. I mean, you're going to chop up pretty significant sections of, wilderness up there.
Yeah, and then a lot of New Hampshireites who say, I talked to some guys in a general store in northern New Hampshire, and they said, well, we're not getting any of those jobs, and I'm not seeing any of that money, and I don't want that thing going through our town.
Oh, not in my backyard.
Yes, pretty much.
Meanwhile, we're over here going, yes, we need the money for
want
our
it.
lake.
Exactly.
Please, please, please.
Help us save our
I'm
lake.
just surprised I've mentioned this 100 times on the show. When I was in the legislature, we had just signed a bill that was going to, cure this whole thing. And then when I ran for the Senate, I found out at a meeting that no, we haven't done much.
yeah.
It's very sad.
And there's a senator who has a plan, Senator Bray from Madison County, the chair of the Energy Committee, wants to put a $1 per month tax on every parcel of property in the state of Vermont, and aggregate raise a ton of money and to help clean up the lake. So that's a bill I think that he's got coming up.
Okay.
And you might need them both.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a
right.
big job.
It's huge, and the further we procrastinate on it, the
Right.
worse the problem gets, the more
Yeah.
expensive it is to
Because
clean it up.
that is such an economic driver. All of us benefit when
Right.
the lake is in good shape and being used as it should.
So is there anything else we should be paying attention to coming up this legislative session? Anything that, really jumps out at you as something that people should be aware of?
What were those?
There was the paid family leave hourly rate to 15, if you want to talk about that.
Oh,
and
right, minimum
mental
wage.
Because
Yes.
do they ever consider how much benefits cost with that you're paying for an employee on top of the 15 hour? It used to be when I was working for the state, it was 24,000 a person. Now I'm sure it's 24%. What am I saying? 24% of. I'm sure now it's 32, 33%.
We were
of
just
salary.
talking about this with Dan Barlow
Yeah.
from VBSR, and they
Yeah.
did a study that just for healthcare, we're not even talking other benefits,
dental
but
and
just for healthcare, it was the equivalent of paying a full-time employee $7 an hour.
Right.
Before you even get to salary,
Yeah.
just healthcare is $7
Yeah,
an
and
hour.
they don't consider that.
Wow.
And I think this is not a one-size-fits-all $15 an hour. There's too many variables out there of employees who don't provide benefits, employees who do provide benefits. There's got to be some kind of sliding scale or something. 'Cause,
Yeah.
I mean, working for a state government, when you retire, the benefits from health care, it's amazing. So I find $15 an hour is pretty scary for a lot of small businesses.
Well, someone, I think it was the governor, I think, was asked. And a reporter said, so what do you think about $15 minimum wage? And he said, by one study, it's going to cost something like 2,000 jobs.
Oh,
And he's all about what they call 6-3, what was it, 2,000 or 1,200, I'm sorry, the number escapes, but a lot of jobs.
his numbers are 631.
Right,
Yeah.
and he says, we're losing 6 jobs
Right.
a day in Vermont.
Yep.
And this will just accelerate that. Said,
Right.
no, I'm not for it.
Right. Good.
Yeah.
Well, we have just a few minutes left. I want to encourage you. How do they get on your list for State House headliners? Because
Email me
email Guy at
at
Page
Communications 4 VT@gmail.com.
It is really worth your time. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.